Well, for more on this, we're now joined by political analyst Sanusha Naidoo. Sanusha, thanks very much indeed for joining us. A lot of chatter on social media and generally with this idea that the Gupta brothers perhaps might have their day in court at some point in the future. Let's just perhaps reflect a little bit politically. What does all of this mean? I mean, the NPA is seeing it as a victory, and I guess for some it's kind of, we've been waiting for something to happen. We've heard all these stories, but nothing has happened. Maybe this is a start. You're going to have to mute.
Good evening, Peter, and good evening to your viewers. Indeed, I think it is quite a important kind of step in the whole prosecution chain in the context of the state capture report that's coming out, the commission of inquiry that was instituted around the role that this family played in the manipulation of state contracts, the relationship, the personal networks, the patronage networks that they had developed with senior government individuals, including as high as the office of the president of Jacob Zuma, and just kind of the kind of leverage they had. So I think on the one hand, politically, it was something that they are the prize in all of this. So they are the ones that need to be held accountable. They need to come and face the law of the land and to be brought to justice. And so that is the one area where people may be feeling that it's, we've been waiting for so long in terms of how much this family has defrauded the state. And of course, they need to now be brought to book. I think on the other hand, we kind of become so caught up in the challenges and the difficulties and the institutional bureaucracy, etc., that I think there's also this other kind of sigh in terms of public opinion and what's happening in terms of how long this process will take. Yeah. Now, listening to the interviews in the insert that you just played, I think it's very important for us to understand that this is not going to basically take place overnight. Legal processes will have to be conformed. Now that the brothers have been arrested in the UAE, and of course the question now remains is they have the right to also have their legal interventions in terms of their where they are in the context of their legal rights and so forth. The other thing just to mention, there's a story a report that came out I think earlier this evening about some of the challenges that we're going to be facing, because it seems as if it's not such a kind of process that can be expedited as we've been led to believe, as we've been listening to the two interviews in the insert that was played. I think there's a challenge here. This report that came out on a competitive news agency earlier this evening suggests that there's a lot of bureaucracy, red tape that's happening on our end, and suggests that as early as February, the UAE or the Abu Dhabi authorities had requested for fingerprints, had requested for all kinds of information to lead them to say that we have a lead here on the arrest of these two brothers, of the family, and there seems to be a little bit of inertia. So I think again we have to ask the question around where is the meeting of the consensus between the fact that the extradition treaty that was signed and so forth has gone through a series of ebbs and flows. But again, the challenge is from our side, the impression one gets, and this report needs to be ventilated further, investigated further, is that there's much more that needs to be done from the South African side.
I don't know how much you know about the United Arab Emirates and their foreign policy, for example, and I just wonder, is there something in it for them to be seen to be assisting in dealing with corruption?
I think, once they've done the kind of collaboration, the cooperation, deposited the instruments of extradition, etc., I don't think they want to be seen as taking this slow. You get the sense from my impression around the foreign policy, around their adherence to global governance frameworks, etc. The Gulf states are playing a critical role in terms of the kinds of foreign policy, economic engagements they're having in Africa, the kinds of soft diplomacy that they're pursuing, and of course the kinds of linkages in terms of economic diplomacy. So I think we can't ignore some of those issues that are in flight mode, in a sense that they're circling around these questions that you're raising with regard to what is there in the context of the diplomatic engagement, as well as the implications this has for foreign policy on both ends of the spectrum. And I think to our mind, it's important to see this collaboration through in terms of the extradition and so forth. But I don't think it's going to happen immediately.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot that needs to go through, and I think we've got to brace ourselves for a long due process that will actually, in terms of public opinion, also start to enter into some kind of ebb and flow. People will feel that it's not being done fast enough or expedited in a fast manner.
All right, let's talk a little bit about optics, because they're quite important, especially when an elective conference is on the horizon, and even general elections not so far into the future as well. Again, let's start with the NPA. Shamila Batohi came in, and there were great hopes coming from the ICC and everything. And I just wonder if now people can start to believe, because we have seen some key figures brought before the courts. And even if this does take a while, the fact that something is in motion must put her in good stead and perhaps generate some confidence.
Yeah, I mean, the promises of some big prosecutions that were in the pipeline was definitely something that came in as she was given the position. Also, the president made those statements in terms of people will be brought to book, they'll be brought to account, they'll be brought to justice. There were a lot of challenges, but there were also this kind of optics that not enough was being done, or there was a bit of a slowness or procrastination. And so I think this is an important optics for the MPA. It's an important optics for the DPP, and it's important in terms of saying, look, we're trying, we're doing it. This is where the optics and the kind of imaging and the kind of overview that we need to be looking at, that we are kind of not necessarily completely fulfilling the entire promise, but we are ratcheting up to the promise in that way. Unfortunately, I think that we live in such a bewildering set of times in our political body of the state that it's very easy for other things to overshadow this. And I think the challenge here is how frustrated is the electorate in terms of things not moving fast enough, in terms of how they have to be held accountable to institutions. And then, of course, there are questions around why certain kinds of institutions are not moving fast enough in terms of prosecution, alignment with ministries, in terms of cooperation, collaboration, etc., within different ministries in the state. And I think this is perhaps where we have to be very, very, very clear that the small victory right now, and I say this not because I want to be disrespectful to the MPA, but I think it's a small victory. They have to think about what's the bigger win here, and whether or not it's going to take a longer time, and how much will that then kind of evaporate in the optics of what we are seeing on social media, in terms of public opinion, in terms of a frustrated electorate, and an electorate that is distrustful of the state.
All right, still with optics. The person who appointed her is Cyril Ramaphosa, president. Yes, he's got drama playing out at the moment that perhaps is getting a lot more airtime than he would wish. But does he get some credit for putting Batohi there and getting these results that we're starting to see?
I mean, I think you have to say that it's coming in the way that he has kept saying that this is we're going to have these prosecutions, we're going to make sure that these individuals are brought to book. But I guess at the same time, there are other questions being raised around his airtime and what's happening in the context of what's going on there. But let's keep these two issues separate, because I think these are important questions that need to be raised, not necessarily in the context of being overshadowed by what we see today. Make no mistake, Peter, that this is an important moment for South Africa when it comes to this arrest warrant and the red notice that went out and the arrest of the Gupta brothers. I mean, it may be not seen in the broader context of happening in a kind of expedited moment, but it's definitely something that we have to think about in the way that these things have been also the architecture around these things have been framed and the way they've been taking place and so forth. So obviously, the credit that you're talking about with regard to the president, it took some time for that kind of appointment to see the value addition. But we are seeing a bit of it now. But I think there's also going to be the optics around of how you navigate those different interpretations of where we should be in terms of getting these brothers back into South Africa and to be held accountable. And as I say, it's going to be long, because now there's going to be intricacies that's also going to come through, and those intricacies are going to be questions around the way the Gupta brothers are going to utilize and pursue their own legal ambit in terms of this whole process. So I think we're going to see a lot of kind of issues that are going to come in terms of the legal context, where they're going to raise, there's going to be a question about, about their release, then there's going to be a question about their rights, then there's going to be a question, and all this is going to happen because this is part of the international question, the legal framework of how we pursue these kinds of extradition treaties. But of course, they are going to also raise questions in terms of their legal counsel.
All right, perhaps as we wrap up, the Zuma camp has asked for a nolle prosequi, which they've got. And again, I'm not going to ask for a legal opinion, but rather, again, optics and politics, because there's people out there who probably think, the president just doesn't want to have his day in court. He's absolutely entitled to exhaust the processes that are available to him. That's his right. But does there get to a point where it starts to become too much for people and they say, hang on, you really just go to court and get this over with?
Yeah, I think the fact that the MPS issued that certificate, which literal translation, as I understand it, is we are not going to prosecute, or we do not want to prosecute, means that you not have a private prosecution that you need to make a decision on. But they are going to fully support Mr. Downer in this prosecution, in this private prosecution, if indeed the Zuma legal counsel decides that they're going to go down that route. I think the challenge again is how much down the line are we going to see this being procrastinated, to exhaust, to stall, all kinds of legal avenues before you actually decide, okay, I'm going to actually go in there and say, you know what, find me guilty or find me not guilty. Let the law decide. And I think these kinds of strategies that we see employed by the Zuma legal counsel and Mr. Zuma's advisors is again to frustrate the system, to frustrate the whole kind of the social cohesion, the kind of interpretation. And I think for some people in society, I think they may have checked out on this, that they probably feel frustrated again, that, is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? Are we going to see a legal outcome, a genuine legal outcome, that basically a process happens, a legal argument takes place, the trial happens, and a decision is made?
All right, Sanusha, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us and giving us some insights. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that's political analyst Sanusha Naidoo speaking about the Guptas, some of the optics that go with that, and also, of course, another development today where the Zuma camp has been given the nolle prosequi by the KwaZulu-Natal NPA, which means the former president now can proceed with a private prosecution. And it is his right. He has every right to follow all the legal processes available to him, and he feels very strongly that Advocate Downer would be a negative on his prosecution. So that's why he's going that